The crisp morning air greeted Emma Clark as she drove her modest sedan into Cedar Valley, her new home tucked away in the rolling hills of Oregon. The quiet town was a far cry from the bustling cities where she had spent most of her life as an FBI profiler. After years of chasing criminals and untangling webs of deceit, she had traded the chaos for simplicity, seeking peace among the town's tree-lined streets and charming cottages. Emma parked in front of the Cedar Valley Library, her new workplace. She stepped out, taking a moment to absorb the quaint surroundings. The library was a modest red brick building with ivy creeping up its sides and a hand-painted sign that read, "Knowledge is the key." She smiled. It seemed like the perfect place to start over. Inside, she was greeted by Margaret Walsh, the library director, a kindly woman in her 60s with a warm demeanor. Margaret wasted no time in showing Emma around, pointing out the shelves of well-worn books and the cozy reading nooks that made the library a beloved part of the community. "We don't get many newcomers," Margaret said as she handed Emma a set of keys. "Cedar Valley has its charms, but it's not exactly a hub of excitement." "That's exactly what I'm looking for," Emma replied, her smile masking the years of turmoil she had left behind. Over the next few weeks, Emma settled into her role as the town's librarian. Her days were filled with shelving books, helping children with school projects, and organizing community events. She quickly became acquainted with the locals, including Lucy Whitaker, a bright high school senior who dreamed of becoming a journalist. "I heard you used to live in Chicago," Lucy said one afternoon, her curiosity evident. "Why'd you move to Cedar Valley?" "Just wanted a quieter life," Emma replied, deflecting. "Chicago can be a bit overwhelming." But even as she embraced her new routine, Emma's instincts began to tingle. Cedar Valley was peaceful on the surface, but there were cracks beneath its facade. One morning, Emma stopped by Carmichael's bakery for coffee. The smell of fresh bread filled the air as she greeted Mr. Carmichael, the cheerful owner. But as she paid for her coffee, she noticed his smile falter. Two men in dark suits had entered the shop, their presence unsettling. Emma pretended to browse a shelf of pastries, her trained eyes studying the men. They approached Mr. Carmichael with an air of intimidation. "Payments are overdue, Carmichael," one of them said, his tone low but menacing. "I just need a little more time," Mr. Carmichael replied, his voice trembling. Emma noted the man's expensive watch and the way he glanced at the bakery's cash register. These weren't ordinary debt collectors. They were here for something far more sinister. When the men left, Emma approached Mr. Carmichael. "Everything okay?" she asked, feigning casual concern. "Oh, just a misunderstanding," he said quickly, wiping his hands on his apron. "Nothing to worry about." But Emma could see the fear in his eyes. As the days passed, Emma began noticing more signs of unease around town. Several businesses had closed recently, their owners leaving without explanation. Conversations would abruptly stop when certain names were mentioned, and people seemed unusually wary of strangers. During a community meeting at the library, she overheard two shop owners whispering about protection payments and the need to stay on the syndicate's good side. The words sent a chill down Emma's spine. She started asking discreet questions, her FBI instincts sharpening. Sheriff Sam Decker, a gruff but kind-hearted man in his 40s, seemed like someone she could trust. She found an opportunity to speak with him after the meeting. "I've been hearing things," Emma began cautiously, "about businesses being forced to pay protection money." Decker sighed, his face heavy with exhaustion. "You're not wrong," he admitted. "It's been happening for a while now. The Evergreen Syndicate controls most of the town. People are too scared to stand up to them. Why hasn't the state stepped in?" Emma asked. "They're careful," Decker replied. "They don't leave evidence. And they've got people in high places looking out for them." Emma returned home that evening, her mind racing. She had moved to Cedar Valley to leave her old life behind, but the town's plight stirred something in her. She couldn't ignore the signs of fear and oppression around her. That night, she sat at her dining table, her laptop open. Years of training came rushing back as she began researching the Evergreen Syndicate, documenting patterns of business closures, suspicious property transfers, and reports of intimidation. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed. She had promised herself she wouldn't get involved again, but Cedar Valley needed someone to fight for it. The next morning, Emma was shelving books when Lucy burst into the library, excitement and fear in her eyes. "Mrs. Clark, you won't believe what I just saw," Lucy said, holding up her phone. On the screen was a blurry photo of one of the men from the bakery, standing outside a closed hardware store. The caption read, "Another one bites the dust." "They're taking over the town," Lucy said, her voice trembling. Emma took a deep breath, her decision solidifying. "Lucy, I need you to be careful," she said. "But if you're willing to help me, we might be able to stop this." Lucy nodded, her resolve matching Emma's. The chapter ends with Emma looking out the library window, her reflection mingling with the view of Cedar Valley streets. She had come here for peace, but the town's struggle had reignited her purpose. The fight was just beginning, and Emma Clark wasn't about to let the syndicate win. Emma Clark had spent the weekend poring over her notes, transforming her dining room into a makeshift operations center. Every scrap of information she gathered about the Evergreen Syndicate went onto sticky notes pinned to a corkboard. Names, locations, and patterns emerged like puzzle pieces falling into place. The syndicate wasn't just a gang. It was a sophisticated organization. They used legitimate businesses as fronts, funneled money through shell companies, and relied on a network of enforcers to intimidate the town. Emma realized their grip extended far beyond Cedar Valley. They were part of a larger, more insidious web. Monday morning, Emma returned to the library, where Lucy was waiting eagerly. The teenager had spent her weekend digging into old newspaper archives and community reports. She handed Emma a folder brimming with printouts and scribbled notes. "Look at this," Lucy said, pointing to a chart she created. "In the last 5 years, 10 businesses in town have closed after failing health inspections or zoning audits. But every time, the property was bought by the same company, Evergreen Ventures." Emma nodded, impressed. "Good work. But we'll need more than this to prove anything." Lucy hesitated. "Do you think we can stop them?" Emma looked at the young woman's hopeful expression and felt a pang of guilt. Lucy had no idea how dangerous this could get, but Emma couldn't let her back down now. "If we're smart and careful, yes," Emma replied. That afternoon, Emma visited the Cedar Valley Diner, a beloved local spot owned by Gloria Martinez, a fiery woman in her 50s who had lived in the town her whole life. Gloria greeted Emma warmly, her apron dusted with flour. "Emma, what brings you by?" "Just wanted to grab a coffee and chat," Emma said, sliding into a booth. "How's business?" Gloria's smile faltered. "It's been tough. Customers are scared to go out much these days. And there's been pressure to sell." "To Evergreen Ventures?" Gloria froze, her hands tightening around the coffee pot. She glanced around the nearly empty diner before leaning in. "How do you know about that?" "I've been noticing things," Emma said gently. "You're not the only one they've targeted, are you?" Gloria shook her head. "They sent someone last week. Said I should sell before my health inspection turns into a problem. But this place has been in my family for 3 generations. I'm not giving it up." "You shouldn't have to," Emma said. "But fighting them won't be easy. You're going to need help." Gloria studied Emma's face. "You're not just a librarian, are you?" Emma smiled faintly. "Let's just say I've dealt with people like this before." That evening, Sheriff Sam Decker knocked on Emma's door. She had left him a message earlier, and he'd reluctantly agreed to meet her. "You've got some nerve dragging me into this," Decker said as Emma let him in. "You know what they'll do if they find out we're poking around?" "They already know I'm paying attention," Emma replied, gesturing to her corkboard. "And they're not going to stop unless someone stands up to them." Decker sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "You don't understand how bad it is. The syndicate owns half the council and a couple of deputies. I can't trust my own people." "That's why we're keeping this quiet," Emma said. "I'm not asking you to raid their headquarters. Just help me gather enough evidence to bring in the feds." Decker hesitated, but finally nodded. "Fine, but if this goes south, you're on your own." The next day, Emma and Lucy began quietly interviewing business owners who had been pressured by the syndicate. Most were too scared to talk, but a few shared stories of harassment and threats. A pattern emerged. The syndicate targeted businesses that were struggling financially, using audits and inspections as leverage to force sales. At the same time, Emma discreetly followed the syndicate's enforcers, observing their routines. She took note of the cars they drove, the places they frequented, and the people they met. One night, she tailed a man named Curtis Malone, a mid-level enforcer, to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. From her hiding spot, Emma watched as trucks arrived, unloading crates marked with vague labels like supplies and inventory. She took photos, her mind racing with possibilities. A week later, Emma returned to the library to find Lucy waiting anxiously. "They're on to us," Lucy said, holding up her phone. "One of their guys came into the school today. He asked my teacher about me, said he wanted to talk about my journalism project." Emma's stomach tightened. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, but it freaked me out. What do we do now?" Emma placed a reassuring hand on Lucy's shoulder. "We keep going, but from now on, you stay out of sight. Let me handle the risky stuff." Lucy nodded, her fear giving way to determination. Later that night, Emma sat at her dining table, reviewing everything she had gathered. The evidence was compelling, but not enough to take down the syndicate. She needed a direct link to the people pulling the strings. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of shattering glass. Emma rushed to the living room to find her front window smashed and a brick lying on the floor. Tied to it was a note. "Stop digging, or we'll make you stop." Emma's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. She picked up the brick and the note, her mind already racing with countermeasures. If the syndicate thought they could scare her off, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Emma Clark stared at the shattered window, the cold night air rushing in as she crumpled the note in her hand. The syndicate's threat was a calculated move, a warning designed to instill fear and stop her investigation. But they underestimated her resolve. This wasn't her first encounter with intimidation, and it wouldn't be the last. The next morning, Emma arrived at the library early, her mind already formulating her next steps. Lucy Whitaker was waiting for her, visibly shaken but resolute. "I heard about the window," Lucy said as Emma unlocked the door. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Emma replied firmly. "But this is a reminder of what we're up against. If you want to step away from this, I won't blame you." Lucy shook her head. "No way. They've taken enough from this town. I'm not letting them win." Emma smiled, proud of Lucy's courage. "Good. Then let's get to work." That day, Emma and Lucy worked tirelessly, consolidating their findings. Emma's corkboard was now covered in a web of connections: names, businesses, dates, and transactions. The syndicate's influence was far-reaching, but the patterns were becoming clearer. Emma's focus narrowed on Curtis Malone, the enforcer she had followed to the warehouse. She suspected the location was a key hub for the syndicate's operations, possibly storing evidence of their illicit activities. "Curtis is the weak link," Emma told Lucy as they reviewed their notes. "If we can track his movements and find out what they're hiding in that warehouse, we'll have something solid to take to the authorities." Lucy nodded, her eyes lighting up with determination. "What's the plan?" That evening, Emma parked her car a few blocks from the warehouse and waited. The area was dimly lit, with only the occasional car passing by. She had equipped herself with a camera, binoculars, and a notebook to document everything. After an hour, a black SUV pulled up and Curtis stepped out, accompanied by two other men. Emma watched as they unloaded several crates from the vehicle and carried them into the warehouse. She snapped photos, noting the markings on the crates, generic labels like office supplies and maintenance equipment. But as one of the men fumbled with a crate lid, Emma caught a glimpse of its contents, rows of cash bundled in plastic wrap. Her pulse quickened. The warehouse wasn't just a storage facility. It was a laundering operation. The next day, Emma met with Sheriff Sam Decker in his office. She laid out her findings, including the photos and notes from the warehouse surveillance. "This is enough to warrant a closer look," Emma said. "If we can get inside and document what's in those crates, it'll be the break we need." Decker frowned, leaning back in his chair. "You're asking me to risk everything on this. If we get caught without backup, the syndicate will bury us." "They're already trying to bury us," Emma countered. "But if we sit back and do nothing, they'll win. You have the badge, Sam. Use it." After a long pause, Decker nodded. "Fine, but we need a plan that minimizes risk. I'll get a warrant, but you have to promise me you'll stay out of this." Emma didn't respond directly, which Decker knew was her way of avoiding a promise she couldn't keep. While Decker worked on securing a warrant, Emma turned her attention to another ally, Gloria Martinez. The diner owner had become a quiet force in their efforts, rallying other business owners to share their stories and stand together. They hit Carmichael's bakery again, Gloria said during their meeting, broke a few windows, slashed his tires. He's scared out of his mind. That's what they want, Emma said, but we can use it against them. The more they escalate, the more evidence we gather. Gloria's jaw tightened. Just tell me what you need. The night of the warehouse operation arrived. Decker and two of his most trusted deputies prepared to execute the warrant while Emma monitored from a safe distance. The raid began smoothly. Decker's team entered the warehouse, documenting crates of cash, counterfeit goods, and ledgers detailing the syndicate's transactions. Emma, watching through binoculars from her car, felt a surge of hope. But the situation took a turn when Curtis Malone arrived unexpectedly, accompanied by 3 more enforcers. The men immediately spotted Decker's squad and drew their weapons. Emma's instincts kicked in. She grabbed her phone and dialed Decker. "Sam, you've got company," she said. 4 men, armed. "Get out of there." "We can't leave this behind," Decker replied, his voice tense. "Then stall," Emma said, already starting her car. Emma drove to a nearby lot, cutting off the syndicate's reinforcements before they could reach the warehouse. She stepped out of her car, holding a flashlight as though she were a lost motorist. "Hey, need some help?" she called out. The men hesitated, confused by her sudden appearance. Curtis stepped forward, glaring. "What are you doing here?" "Just looking for my dog," Emma said, feigning innocence. "He ran off, and I thought I saw him come this way." Curtis didn't buy it. "Get out of here before you regret it." Emma took a step closer, shining her flashlight on their license plates. "You sure about that?" Before Curtis could react, the sound of sirens filled the air. Sheriff Decker's deputies emerged from the warehouse, armed and ready. Curtis and his men, caught off guard, froze. "You're under arrest," Decker announced, his deputies moving swiftly to apprehend them. The raid was a success. Decker's team secured evidence that linked the warehouse to the syndicate's larger operations. Curtis, now in custody, faced charges that could potentially lead to a deal and valuable information. Back at her house, Emma reviewed the photos and documents Decker had shared. The ledger contained names, dates, and amounts, enough to implicate several key players in Cedar Valley. Lucy arrived, her excitement barely contained. "We did it, didn't we? This is enough to take them down." "It's a start," Emma said cautiously, "but they won't go down without a fight. We need to stay vigilant." As Emma spoke, her phone buzzed with an anonymous text. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Clark. Walk away while you still can." Emma's jaw tightened. She showed the message to Lucy. "This is far from over." The discovery of the warehouse's contents sent shockwaves through Cedar Valley's tight-knit community. Sheriff Decker kept the raid quiet for now, but the evidence gathered, a trove of ledgers, cash, and counterfeit goods, provided a glimpse into the syndicate's vast network of corruption. Still, Emma Clark knew this was just the beginning. "They'll retaliate," Emma told Decker in his office the morning after the raid. She had the ledgers spread out on the desk, each page meticulously documented with transactions tied to the syndicate's operations. "You hit them hard, and they'll hit back harder," Decker sighed, running a hand over his face. "I know, but this is the first real break we've had in years. We can't let them scare us into backing down." Emma nodded. "Then we need the town on our side. If the syndicate realizes they're losing their grip, they'll try to turn the community against us." Decker frowned. "How do you plan to do that?" "By showing the town what they're really up against," Emma replied. That evening, Emma met with Gloria Martinez at the diner. The usual hum of conversation was muted, with only a handful of customers scattered at the booths. Gloria's expression darkened as Emma explained the situation. "We need to bring people together," Emma said. "If the town sees what's at stake, they'll stand with us. But it has to come from trusted voices, people like you." Gloria set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Emma, these people are terrified. They've seen what happens when you cross the syndicate. I'm not sure they'll listen." "They will if you lead the charge," Emma insisted. "We don't have to fight them head-on. We just need to show the syndicate they can't divide us anymore. Gloria stared at her for a moment before nodding. All right, what do you need me to do? The next day, Emma and Gloria organized a small, discreet meeting at the church, led by Pastor Reynolds. They invited a handful of business owners, all of whom had suffered under the syndicate's grip. As the group gathered in the quiet sanctuary, Emma stood before them, holding up copies of the ledgers from the warehouse raid. These documents prove what we've all suspected, Emma said. The syndicate has been using Cedar Valley as a cash cow, extorting businesses, laundering money, and threatening anyone who gets in their way. But we've also uncovered something else. They're not as untouchable as they want us to think. She laid out the evidence, pointing to specific entries. The group listened intently, their fear slowly giving way to anger. They've taken enough from this town, Gloria added, her voice firm. It's time we take it back. But we have to stand together. One by one, the attendees shared their stories, harassment, intimidation, and the financial toll of the syndicate's control. By the end of the meeting, a sense of solidarity began to form. What can we do? Asked Mr. Carmichael, the bakery owner. Start by documenting everything, Emma said. Every threat, every demand, every suspicious transaction. The more evidence we have, the harder it'll be for them to deny. Emma's next step was to enlist the help of Lucy Whitaker. The teenager's passion for investigative journalism had already proven invaluable, and Emma knew she could use Lucy's skills to spread the message. I want to create a timeline, Emma explained, handing Lucy a stack of notes. We'll show how the syndicate's actions have affected the town over the years, who they've hurt, what they've taken. People need to see the big picture. Lucy's eyes lit up. I can do that. We can publish it anonymously, right? Maybe on a blog? Emma nodded. Exactly. But be careful. They're already watching us. Over the next few days, the community began to shift. Gloria and Pastor Reynolds spread the word quietly, encouraging business owners and residents to document their experiences with the syndicate. Meanwhile, Lucy worked tirelessly to compile the evidence into a compelling narrative, publishing articles under the pseudonym Cedar Sentinel. The blog quickly gained traction. People shared it on social media, and conversations about the syndicate's hold on Cedar Valley began to bubble to the surface. Emma kept a low profile, knowing the syndicate would be searching for the source of the resistance. As the town slowly rallied, the syndicate escalated its tactics. One night, Gloria's diner was vandalized, windows shattered, graffiti scrawled across the walls. But instead of cowering, Gloria called Emma and the others to the diner the next morning. We're fixing this, Gloria said, grabbing a broom. Within hours, townsfolk arrived to help. They replaced the windows, scrubbed the graffiti, and brought food and drinks to support the effort. The show of unity sent a clear message. The syndicate's intimidation wouldn't work anymore. Emma continued her quiet surveillance of the syndicate, focusing on Curtis Malone. Now out on bail, Curtis was trying to lay low, but Emma's experience told her he was nervous. She followed him to a bar on the edge of town, where he met with two other men. Using a hidden microphone, Emma recorded their conversation. Curtis's companions were higher up in the syndicate's chain, discussing plans to contain the problem in Cedar Valley. We need to make an example, one of the men said. Find out who's behind this and shut them down. Emma clenched her fists. They were onto her efforts, but the conversation provided crucial intel about the syndicate's next moves. Back in the library, Emma and Lucy reviewed the recording. They're planning something big, Lucy said, her voice tinged with fear. What do? We stay ahead of them, Emma replied. We have the town on our side now. That's our greatest weapon. The chapter ends with a pivotal moment, a town hall meeting organized by Pastor Reynolds and Gloria. For the first time in years, Cedar Valley's residents gather openly to discuss the syndicate's grip on their town. Emma watches from the back of the room as one by one, people share their stories and pledge to fight back. But as the meeting concludes, Emma notices a man in the shadows, watching the crowd with a predatory gaze. It's Victor Holt, the syndicate's leader, and his presence sends a chilling reminder that the battle for Cedar Valley is far from over. Victor Holt's arrival in Cedar Valley was like a storm cloud settling over the town. Emma Clark had seen men like him before, calculated, ruthless, and willing to do whatever it took to maintain control. His presence confirmed her worst fears. The syndicate knew their grip on the town was slipping, and they were ready to escalate. At the diner, Gloria Martinez spoke in hushed tones to Emma as they cleaned up after another long day. Holt's been spotted meeting with people all over town. Council members, business owners, even Sheriff Decker. He's trying to scare everyone back into line. Emma frowned. If they're bringing in Holt, it means they're feeling the pressure. That's good. It also means they'll strike hard and fast. We need to be ready. The next morning, Sheriff Decker called Emma into his office. He looked more exhausted than usual, his eyes bloodshot and his desk cluttered with reports. "They're leaning on me," Decker said, pushing a document across the desk. "The council's ordered me to back off the investigation. They're claiming we don't have enough evidence to pursue charges, even with everything we pulled from the warehouse." Emma scanned the document, her jaw tightening. This is Holt's doing. He's using the council to stall us while he regroups. Decker slammed his fist on the desk. "I'm done with this. I became a cop to protect people, not to play politics with criminals. But if I go against them without more evidence, they'll bury me." "We'll get the evidence," Emma said firmly. "But we need to act quickly before they shut us down completely." Emma and Lucy Whitaker began working around the clock, digging deeper into the syndicate's operations. Lucy used her blog, The Cedar Sentinel, to expose the syndicate's tactics, publishing stories about extortion, vandalism, and intimidation. Each post garnered more attention, sparking conversations across town. But the syndicate retaliated with a smear campaign. Anonymous flyers appeared around town, accusing Emma of being an outsider stirring up trouble. They claimed Lucy's blog was full of lies, warning townsfolk to stay out of syndicate business if they know what's good for them. One evening, as Lucy walked home from school, a black SUV pulled up alongside her. The window rolled down, revealing Curtis Malone, his face twisted in a smug grin. "You're making a lot of noise, kid," Curtis said. "Might want to think about keeping quiet." Lucy froze, fear gripping her. But then she thought of Emma's words. Fear is what they count on. Don't give it to them. "I'm not afraid of you," Lucy said, her voice steady. Curtis chuckled. "We'll see about that." The SUV sped off, leaving Lucy shaken but more determined than ever. The syndicate's next move came late one night. Gloria's Diner, a hub for the community's resistance, was set ablaze. By the time firefighters arrived, the building was engulfed in flames. Gloria stood in the parking lot, tears streaming down her face as she watched the family business she'd poured her life into burn to the ground. Emma arrived moments later, placing a comforting hand on Gloria's shoulder. "We'll rebuild," Emma said, "and we'll make them pay for this." The fire sent shockwaves through Cedar Valley. For some, it was a wake-up call, galvanizing their resolve. For others, it was a reminder of the syndicate's reach, pushing them back into silence. The next day, Emma called an emergency meeting at the library. Pastor Reynolds, Sheriff Decker, Gloria, and several other key community members attended. "They're escalating because they know they're losing control," Emma began. "But this is also our opportunity. We need to strike back while they're vulnerable." "How?" Mr. Carmichael asked. "They're burning down businesses. What can we do against that kind of power?" "Expose them," Emma said. "We have the ledgers, the recordings, and the blog. But we need to tie it all together with one big move, something that forces the state and federal authorities to act." Lucy raised her hand, a determined look on her face. "I've been working on something. A full expose, with all the evidence we've gathered. If we release it to the media, they can't ignore it." Decker nodded. "If it goes public, the syndicate won't be able to operate in the shadows anymore. But it's going to make us all targets." "Then we make sure we're ready," Emma said. That night, Emma stayed up late, preparing for the fallout. She secured her files, encrypted her communications, and sent copies of the evidence to trusted contacts outside Cedar Valley. She also paid a visit to Curtis Malone, who was still out on bail. Using her knowledge of his routine, she cornered him as he left a local bar. "You're running out of time, Curtis," Emma said, stepping out of the shadows. Curtis jumped, his hand instinctively reaching for his pocket. "Don't bother," Emma said. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to offer you a way out." Curtis laughed nervously. "You're insane. I'm not flipping on Holt. You will when you realize how expendable you are to him, Emma said, her voice cold. The moment you're no longer useful, he'll cut you loose. But if you help us, I can make sure you're protected. Curtis hesitated, the fear in his eyes betraying his bravado. What do you want? Names, Emma said. Locations. Everything you know about Holt's operations. Curtis didn't answer, but Emma could tell he was wavering. The next morning, Lucy's exposé went live. The blog post was a bombshell, detailing years of the syndicate's corruption with photos, documents, and first-hand accounts from business owners. It spread quickly, drawing the attention of regional media and law enforcement. The syndicate's response was immediate. Holt sent his enforcers to intimidate key figures in the town, but they were met with resistance. The community, emboldened by Emma's leadership, refused to back down. In one instance, Sheriff Decker and his deputies intercepted a group of enforcers outside Mr. Carmichael's bakery, arresting them for trespassing. The arrest sent a clear message. Cedar Valley was no longer afraid. The chapter ends with a confrontation between Emma and Victor Holt. Holt approaches her outside the library, his sharp suit and calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos he orchestrates. "You've been busy," Holt said, his tone almost amused. "You underestimated this town," Emma replied. Holt's smile faded. "This won't end well for you. Walk away while you still can." Emma stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "I've faced worse than you, Holt, and I'm still here. Can you say the same?" Holt's expression darkened, but he said nothing as he turned and walked away. Emma watched him go, knowing the fight was far from over. The air was electric in Cedar Valley as Lucy Whitaker's exposé gained traction. The blog post, titled "The Syndicate's Stranglehold on Cedar Valley," painted a damning picture of the Evergreen Syndicate's decades-long corruption and extortion. It was accompanied by photos of ledgers, records of illegal transactions, and first-hand accounts from brave locals who had chosen to speak out. The story was undeniable. The regional media quickly picked it up, sending reporters to Cedar Valley to investigate. For the first time, the town's plight was no longer a local secret. It was a public scandal. Emma Clark stood in the library, monitoring the rising tide of attention. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from journalists, activists, and even state authorities seeking more information. "This is it," Emma said to Sheriff Decker, who stood beside her. "This is the tipping point." Decker nodded, though his face remained tense. "If this doesn't work, they'll burn the whole town to the ground." That night, Cedar Valley's town hall was packed. Residents, business owners, reporters, and even a few out-of-town activists filled every seat. Gloria Martinez, her voice still hoarse from the smoke of her burned diner, stood at the front of the room alongside Emma and Pastor Reynolds. "This town has lived in fear for too long," Gloria began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "But not anymore. The Evergreen Syndicate has taken from all of us, our businesses, our homes, our peace of mind. It's time we take it back." The crowd murmured in agreement, their fear slowly transforming into determination. Emma stepped forward, holding up a copy of the syndicate's ledger. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We have the proof. Now we need to hold them accountable. That means standing together, refusing to let them intimidate us anymore." Applause erupted from the crowd, but Emma knew it wouldn't be enough to stop what was coming. Victor Holt watched the meeting from a car parked down the street, his face set in a grim expression. One of his enforcers, a wiry man named Jackson, sat in the driver's seat. "They're rallying," Jackson said, lighting a cigarette. "They're overreaching," Holt replied coldly. "They think they can win because they have the public's attention, but they've forgotten who really holds the power." "What's the plan?" Holt's eyes narrowed. "Make an example of them. Start with Clark." The next morning, Emma woke to find her house vandalized. The front door was spray-painted with the words "Go home," and her car windows were shattered. She stood on the porch, surveying the damage as Sheriff Decker arrived. "This is just the start," Decker said grimly. "They're testing the waters to see if they can scare you off." "They'll have to try harder than that," Emma replied. Meanwhile, Curtis Malone, the syndicate enforcer Emma had confronted, found himself backed into a corner. The evidence against him from the warehouse raid was overwhelming, and his lawyer warned him that the syndicate's loyalty wouldn't extend far enough to protect him. Curtis called Emma late that afternoon. "We need to talk," he said, his voice shaky. They met at a secluded spot near the edge of town. Curtis looked rough, his face pale and his hands trembling. "I'm not doing this because I like you," he said. "I'm doing it because I don't want to end up dead." "Fair enough," Emma replied. "What do you have for me?" Curtis handed her a flash drive. "It's everything. Accounts, meeting records, even Holt's direct communications. He thinks he's untouchable, but this'll prove otherwise." Emma took the drive, her heart racing. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Lucy and Emma spent the next 24 hours compiling Curtis's information with the existing evidence. The flash drive contained damning details, names of officials on the syndicate's payroll, records of kickbacks, and even evidence linking Holt to violent crimes. As they worked, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Holt wouldn't go down without a fight. "He knows we're coming for him," Emma said. "He'll try to silence us before we can make this public." Lucy glanced at the door, her face pale. "What do we do?" "We finish this," Emma replied. The syndicate struck that evening. A group of enforcers broke into the library, smashing computers and destroying files. But they were too late. Emma had already backed up everything to secure servers. Sheriff Decker arrived moments after the attack, his deputies arresting 2 of the enforcers who had been caught on security cameras. "This is escalating fast," Decker said. "If we don't take Holt down soon, someone's going to get hurt." The next morning, Emma, Decker, and Gloria held a press conference in front of the charred remains of Gloria's diner. Reporters crowded around as Emma presented copies of the ledgers and Curtis's flash drive to the state attorney general, who had arrived to oversee the investigation. "This evidence ties the Evergreen Syndicate to a decade of crimes, including extortion, money laundering, and conspiracy," Emma announced. "We're calling on state and federal authorities to intervene and dismantle this organization." The press conference was broadcast statewide, drawing widespread attention. But Emma knew Holt wouldn't take this lying down. That night, Holt made his move. A team of enforcers ambushed Emma as she walked to her car. She fought back with the precision of her FBI training, disarming one man and using his own weapon to keep the others at bay. Sheriff Decker and his deputies arrived just in time, arresting the attackers. Emma, bruised but unbroken, stood tall as Holt's men were loaded into patrol cars. The chapter ends with Emma receiving a phone call from Holt. "You think you've won," Holt said, his voice low and dangerous. "But I still have cards to play." Emma's reply was calm and unwavering. "So do I." As she hung up, Emma looked out over the town, now alive with hope and determination. The fight wasn't over, but Cedar Valley was ready for whatever came next. Victor Holt paced the length of his lavish office, his calm veneer cracking as he listened to the latest reports. His trusted lieutenant, Jackson, stood by, his face pale. "They've arrested 6 of our enforcers," Jackson said. "The state's moving in, and the feds aren't far behind. The whole town's rallied against us." Holt clenched his fists. "This isn't over until I say it is. If they want a war, we'll give them one. Hit them where it hurts. Show them that resistance has consequences." Jackson hesitated. "That could bring more heat." "I don't care." Holt snapped. "Make the call." By dawn, Cedar Valley woke to chaos. Mr. Carmichael's bakery had been firebombed, and several other businesses reported vandalism. Flyers were posted around town warning residents to stand down or suffer the consequences. Sheriff Sam Decker arrived at the bakery to find Mr. Carmichael sitting on the curb, his face buried in his hands. "They're trying to break us," Decker said, turning to Emma Clark, who stood nearby. Emma's expression was hard, her jaw tight. "They don't realize they've already lost. We just need to make them see it." Emma convened an emergency meeting at Pastor Reynolds' church, attended by the town's key leaders and residents who were no longer willing to live in fear. "We're in the final stretch," Emma said, addressing the group. "Holt is desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. We need to hold our ground and keep gathering evidence. Every act of violence they commit strengthens our case." "But what if they come after us?" asked a young shop owner. "They're getting more aggressive." "We don't face them alone," Pastor Reynolds said. "We stand together, just like we have from the start." Meanwhile, Lucy Whitaker continued her work, publishing updates on the Cedar Sentinel. Her latest post detailed the syndicate's escalating violence and included first-hand accounts from victims. The post went viral, drawing the attention of national media. As reporters descended on Cedar Valley, Holt's name became synonymous with corruption and intimidation. "It's working," Lucy told Emma, excitement lighting up her face. "People are finally paying attention." Emma nodded, but remained cautious. "Attention's good, but Holt's not done yet. He'll make a final move. We need to be ready." The syndicate's next attack came swiftly. That night, armed enforcers stormed the church, where Gloria Martinez and several residents were preparing supplies for the community. Emma, who had anticipated such a move, was already in position with Sheriff Decker and a handful of trusted deputies. When the enforcers burst through the doors, they were met with a swift and coordinated response. Emma disarmed one man with practiced efficiency, while Decker and his deputies subdued the others. Within minutes, the enforcers were handcuffed and loaded into patrol cars. "You expected this," Gloria said, her voice shaking as she watched the scene unfold. "They're predictable when they're desperate," Emma replied. "This was Holt's attempt to scare us. Now we turn it against him." The arrest provided a treasure trove of new evidence. Emma and Decker interrogated the enforcers, who, faced with lengthy prison sentences, began to talk. They revealed details about Holt's remaining operations, including the location of his safe house, a remote cabin in the woods where he stored incriminating documents. "This could be the break we need," Decker said. "It's a trap," Emma warned. "Holt's too smart to leave himself vulnerable. He'll be waiting for us." "We don't have a choice," Decker replied. "If we want to end this, we have to take the risk." Emma, Decker, and a small team of deputies planned their approach carefully. Armed with a warrant, they set out at dawn, driving through the dense forest toward the cabin. The tension was palpable as they arrived, the morning light casting eerie shadows across the clearing. "Stay sharp," Emma said, her voice steady. The team approached the cabin, weapons drawn. Inside, they found stacks of documents, ledgers, and a laptop, all evidence tying Holt to the syndicate's crimes. But as they began to collect the evidence, gunfire erupted from the tree line. "Ambush!" Emma shouted, diving for cover. The firefight was intense, the syndicate's enforcers firing from hidden positions. Emma and the deputies returned fire, their training and coordination giving them the upper hand. Emma spotted Holt among the attackers, his calm demeanor replaced by rage. "You're done, Holt," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Holt sneered. "Not yet, Clark." Emma moved with precision, flanking the attackers and using the terrain to her advantage. One by one, the enforcers were subdued, until only Holt remained. As he tried to flee, Emma tackled him to the ground, pinning him with practiced skill. "It's over," she said, her voice cold. Holt glared at her, his confidence shattered. "You think this changes anything?" Emma leaned closer. "It changes everything." With Holt in custody, the syndicate's operations began to unravel. The evidence from the cabin was damning, providing state and federal authorities with everything they needed to dismantle the organization. Back in Cedar Valley, news of Holt's capture spread quickly. The town erupted in celebration, residents flooding the streets to reclaim their community. At the library, Lucy hugged Emma tightly. "We did it," she said, tears streaming down her face. Emma smiled, though the weight of the battle still lingered. "We did. But the work isn't over. We've won the fight, but now we need to rebuild." The chapter ends with Emma standing in the town square, watching as Cedar Valley begins to heal. For the first time in years, the town feels alive with hope and possibility. But Emma knows there's one final chapter to this story, ensuring the syndicate never regains its foothold and teaching the town how to protect itself for generations to come.